Hi everyone and welcome to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone and today we are doing part 1 of our Toy Fair 2012 special. Last year we were able to cover Toy Fair primarily through the reports that we get on the internet and the press kits that different toy companies put out, and we can, examine the products and take a kind of close look at some of the things we're interested in. Given the fact that we attended New York Comic Con last year, we gave it a try and said, let's see if we can maybe this time around go to Toy Fair. Now the thing about Toy Fair is that it's primarily for toy exhibitors. Obviously they're exhibiting their toy lines, they're letting people know what's coming. Some of them are actually looking for people that will fund their toys. Some of them are showing you things that are in the developmental stages and stuff like that. And the purpose of it is so you combine these people that are trying to basically sell their toys. Not necessarily selling on the spot. This isn't about selling toys like you do on a convention where you put out a whole bunch of toys and people come up to you and buy them. This is more industry-wide. In other words, let's say I own a chain of toy stores, mom and pop stores, let's say, for example, and I want to sell a certain toy. I want to sell, a certain action figure line. So I would attend this Toy Fair event and I would see what people are offering. And if I find something I like, I would then sit down with them and try to make a deal for, X amount of units and that sort of thing. So the type of people that attend this event is a little different than the crowd you see at New York Comic Con. These are professionals. You have buyers, people that come in there to basically to buy toys wholesale. They're looking for a lot of toys and that sort of thing. The press is there to report on some new line of toys that is coming out from somebody that we already know, for example, somebody like Lego. Lego's been around for a very long time, and now they're, showing you, previewing kind of what's the new line for later this year. But you also have first-time toy makers, some of them from opposite ends of the spectrum. You have from the super experienced, successful toy makers to the brand new, guy building something in his basement type of toy maker who's looking for funding. So one thing to keep in mind is that the type of stuff that I was seeing at Toy Fair, some of it could potentially never make it to the store. In other words, if a toy manufacturer is showing you some concept art, concept merchandise, if they don't hook up with a certain backer or buyer, they might not ever get to actually produce whatever it is that they're trying to show you out there. Now, with that said, there were a lot of names that I'm very familiar with, based on some of the toys I've purchased in the past. A lot of them I've never heard from, in my entire life. So let me try to paint a picture a little bit of how the room works. The Toy Fair took place this time, and it usually does, I believe, at the Jacob Javits Center in Manhattan, New York City. This is the same place where they had New York Comic Con last year, and they usually do too. Now, last year when we went to Comic Con, we were in this huge third floor exhibit area, which was, to me, it was gigantic. It was ridiculous how big it was. I mean, it was packed. We were there representing ourselves. We had our own table there and everything. This same area was completely packed for Toy Fair. Now, from what I remember, that third level area was basically broken down into 3 sections. There were like these walls separating these 3 huge, gigantic sections. And that was New York Comic Con. This time around, not only was that entire area completely full, they also had a first floor level, a level 1 area, almost as big as that, if not bigger. And that was completely full too. Again, amazing the amount of booths that were out there. It was just mind-numbing, the amount of people trying to sell their products. If that wasn't enough, there was a separate registration area where once you entered that registration area, they also had another, from what I understand, was like last-minute edition, and there was a whole other section of booths of people selling, promoting their material, which it was just incredible. I mean, keep in mind, it's a little different when you're at Comic-Con, because in Comic-Con, you're going booth to booth, and you might want to buy something here or there. You stop and buy stuff. Here, it's like being at a toy store, and you're told that you can't really buy anything. So it's amazing. It's torturous because you see all these great toys and the best you can hope for is some literature on them or some sample of here or there or something. But you're not really allowed to buy anything unless you're a wholesaler and you're making a deal. Now, the layout is pretty similar in terms of how these booths are arranged. They're arranged similarly in the same fashion. You walk up and down these huge, gigantic aisles. The main difference is that at New York Comic Con, the booths, for the most part, are pretty much the same size. You got some bigger dealers might have double the space, triple the space. At Toy Fair, the size of these booths were ridiculously different. You have your small table, display area, and then you have these areas that are like the size of a small apartment. They take up the equivalent of, let's say, for example, 10, 15, 25 booths. And what they do is they block them all off and basically form one giant room. And now it's all walled in. You got to keep this in mind. A lot of these big giant booths, they're walled in. So when you're walking up and down these aisles, you could see who the particular manufacturer that you're dealing with is, but you can't really go into the booth. They have an entrance area. So you go to the entrance, and depending on who you are, you ask, or if you already have in advance some kind of an appointment, they then let you go into their booth, and usually you are accompanied by a representative of that company, and they'll walk you through their different merchandise and show you the things that they're selling or promoting. This is how it works for the bigger, more, I don't know if you want to call them upscale, but more successful toy manufacturers. Manufacturers like Lego, for example, they had their own entire gigantic booth, and you would go there and ask, could I see your line? And they will ask you, do you have an appointment? You're like, no, I want to make one right now. And they would say, okay, well, we can fit you in at, this time or that time. And then you would go in, obviously they would check your credentials, make sure you're either a buyer or you're a press. And this is a trade show. This is not for the general public. As a matter of fact, it in advance, no children allowed, no one under 18 allowed in there, whether you're selling, promoting, or whatever the heck you're doing, they don't want kids in there because they don't want it to turn into a Comic-Con type of scenario where you have people just looking and walking away, a whole bunch of looky-looks. So what they're trying to do, like I said before, is they're trying to attract buyers, wholesale buyers, and they're trying to attract press. So that's basically how it works for some of these booths. Now, the smaller booths, you walk in, you do whatever you want, you walk out. You walk in, you walk out. You walk in, you walk out. Some of them are not even booths. Some of them are just a table. And you walk up to the table and you look at their stuff and you're like, oh, that's interesting. You ask them questions, they talk to you, that sort of thing. But you have a wide spectrum of what you would call salesmen there. There are places you're trying to get into, and there are places that they're calling you into. You walk down certain aisles and they're like, hey, how you doing? Hey, you want to check this out? Look at this. We have this new blah, 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 And it's funny because when you're walking up and down the aisles, everybody's looking at each other's ID. Everybody has to wear a badge, and the badge tells everybody whether you are an exhibitor, a buyer, a manufacturer, press, all these different things. And it's like everybody is sizing you up based on what your badge says. So that's how it works. As I mentioned before, the layout is kind of weird. I mean, the third floor felt kind of like a free-for-all, even though things were kind of arranged in a certain manner. The first level was a little more subdivided. There was like certain sections where you could say, okay, well, this is where they're hiding all the action figure companies. And then you would walk to another area. Now, if you remember back in New York Comic Con, it's kind of like the 100s, the 200s, the 300s, the 1000s, the 1500s, the 2000s. Those numbers went up to almost 6,000 in terms of the amount of booth sections. So you would walk from one area and it was primarily action figure based. You would walk to another area and it would be kind of like pre-K toys, little kiddie toys. You walk to another area and it's all kind of like dolls, kids, girl dolls. Another area would be outdoor toys. Another area would be box games. It's just amazing, all these different, subdivisions of types of toys and how they would be arranged. Another thing to keep in mind is that because, as I mentioned before, this isn't an open public event, they do weed out a lot of people, a lot of fanboys, and a lot of people that are into toys. The other thing that I noticed while I was walking the floor was that, it was not as crowded. And that's one of the reasons why, because it's just professionals and press. It was not as crowded as New York Comic Con. Part of it could be the fact that you had the equivalent of 2.5 times the room that you had before. And the fact that, it's not a public event. And I was able to kind of walk the entire floor somewhat quickly, I guess I could say. The actual toy fair took place from, I believe, the 12th of February, which is a Sunday, to the 15th of January. Now, from what I understand, there are other events that would take place beforehand, outside the facility. Like, for example, some companies are so large, let's say, and so successful and so exclusive that they don't even have a booth at Toy Fair. They have a showroom at a separate location somewhere else, which was the case with Hasbro. So some of these places are completely located somewhere else. As I walked the floor, it took me about, I would say, 2.5 hours, I would say almost 3 hours to do the entire 2.5 level location. Not very crowded in terms of, not having to weave your way in and out of booths and showrooms and that sort of thing. The aisles were pretty open. You could walk up and down the aisles without any craziness. But because, you're not interested in every single thing there, it kind of spreads it all out. And I probably visited, I would say, and by that I mean actually stopped and look at, maybe go inside a booth or engage with somebody in a booth, probably about 10-15%, I would say, of what was out there. Because like I mentioned before, this is Toy Fair in general. This isn't just Star Wars or, Marvel or Lego. This is everything. So specifically from my point of view, I was looking for those genre toys that I'm into and I know some of my friends are into. But yeah, there were just so many of them. I mean, it was just maddening how many representatives were there. And it was also interesting how many they were not there. For example, when it comes to toys, Star Wars toys, I know that some of the big shots, if you will, of higher end products are places like Sideshow Collectibles, Gentle Giant, the manufacturers of statues. They do replicas, that sort of thing. And, you're talking about the $200, $300, $400, $500, $1,000 items that sell on the internet. They weren't there. Those particular ones were not there. There were some others there, but those big ones were not there. And from what I understand, it's not the first time. In a few previous Comic-Cons, I believe, some of them have not shown up for those type of things. And I don't know, I don't understand why. You figure this would be the perfect place for them. But I guess it's kind of like a niche market, and you're not going to find, for those kind of products, somebody who's willing to say, okay, give me 300 of these. No. From what I understand, a lot of these are kind of manufactured in very small batches. And then if for whatever reason they do sell out, they might make more. But it's not like you're producing 1 million pieces or 500,000 pieces of an item. These higher end busts, statues, are more of a niche market type of thing. With that said, there were a few there that actually fall under that category. The other thing I noticed, and as I walk up and down the aisles, I'm looking at the booths inside, you see these little tables set up. Showroom tables. They're very presentable little tables with like maybe about 5 or 6 seats around the round table. And a lot of them had what looked like to be, and I'm sure that's what it was people making deals, like business people, with calculators. And you would have like 3 representatives of whatever company happens to be there and 3 representatives of some seller, some buyer. And they're like crunching numbers and they're shaking hands and this and that. And it was just bizarre. I mean, I've never seen something like that. I'm used to just individuals buying individual products, but no, these people are, I'm sure they're making like, give me 1,000 pieces of this and give me 1,000 pieces of that. And what kind of price can you make me on that? So it had a little strange vibe to it. The type of thing where like, if that's happening in a booth, you would feel a little weird kind of going in there and saying, hey guys, what's going on here? What are you guys selling? It's like you're interrupting a business meeting. It's kind of weird. Like I said, that was happening in a couple of booths here or there. As far as genre goes, boy, there's just so much. It's just maddening how crazy it is. And it's funny because you hear some items like pop out of nowhere that you never realized, that they were actually marketing in some shape or form. For example, one of these companies, they were pitching a game based on the Big Bang Theory, a box game. So, it's kind of weird because you're talking about a product that you can't really imagine how much can you merchandise a sitcom, if you think about it. Other than a poster or a shirt or a button, can you really make a game out of a sitcom? Well, apparently they did, and it's coming out in like another month or two. Other brands, like The Walking Dead, so far they've made a couple of action figures, they've made some collectible cards. Apparently they're putting out a board game. And again, it's kind of weird when you hear board game because it's got to be something really catchy, when it comes to marketing from a collector's perspective. I mean, a board game is not really a collector item. It's an actual game. You have to engage and play it. But it seems kind of weird that, that kind of subject matter is worthy of a game, an actual game. I'm sure sooner or later they'll have a video game version, which makes a little more sense. But a box game, it's a little odd. One of the booths that I stopped at is the Kurubukiya booth. This is a Japanese company that manufactures a really odd combination of items. On one hand, they do quite a number of statues, like sculpted Star Wars related. I mean, they have other brands under their belt, but they do a number of Star Wars related statues. These are usually about a foot tall, maybe a little smaller. They're high-end items. You're talking about some things that could cost about $100, $200, that sort of thing, which is kind of like a mid-range price, I would imagine, for that type of a product. Now, what's interesting is that some of the products they had there, some of these statues, they had some Boba Fett and Darth Vader and some Darth Mauls and Yodas. So what's interesting about some of these statues that they were showing us is that some of them are actually waiting licensing approval because they're showing you their concept mock-up, their prototypes. They might not have nailed down the license yet. So here's one of these cases where they'll show you something and it might or might not come out, depending on whether they can acquire the license of that specific product. Again, they do have the license for some other ones, but I guess sometimes when they do a different one, they have to always, obviously, approve it. But they at least show it to you, so at least you know in what direction they're going. And, it kind of gets the market excited about a product. The other thing that Kurobukiya does is ice trays. Recently, they started making they're kind of like silicone ice trays that apparently you can use them, obviously, to make ice, or you can bake in them. You can make like chocolate or some kind of a candy or cookie type of deal. And they do them in the shape of Star Wars objects. Last year, I believe they had Han Solo and Carbonite shape. You can make ice cubes out of that. And they had R2-D2 shapes. Well, this year, they've added a couple of new ones. They added a Vader head, Darth Vader, the Millennium Falcon shape, an X-Wing, and I believe a Stormtrooper head. These go either way, cold or hot. You can make whatever you want with them. They're usually about $10 a pop, not bad. And, these should be coming out soon. This is also the same company that manufactured the Star Wars chopsticks based on lightsaber hilts. This is a cool little item that I remember I purchased previously. I haven't seen any new ones coming out later this year, so we'll see what happens next, but they're still selling the old ones. It's funny, the setup was pretty similar to the same setup they had at New York Comic Con and the same setup they had at Celebration 5. The same kind of booth, the same kind of products, but they're there this time around selling in a different way, not to individuals, but to companies. And, it helps to promote. Another place I stopped at is the Uncle Milton booth. Now, Uncle Milton is a company that is involved with Star Wars because recently what they've done is they've created a number of, I guess you could call them educational, scientific kind of items. And in the past, they've had, these specialized night lights and you could do like a scientific volcano experiment, looking like Mustafar's, mountains and stuff like that, to simulate lava. Well, and they also had, I believe, one of those force trainers where you put this device on your head and you're supposed to levitate these balls and stuff like that. Well, this time around, they've introduced a couple of new items. They already kind of had they're kind of like miniature lightsabers that you can assemble yourself. You kind of build them there's lots of little parts to them and you can actually, put them together, and it kind of teaches you how the electronics works of an item. This time around, they're introducing some new ones that they haven't had before. They also have something called the anti-gravity balls, which are basically the regular bouncy balls that you used to, if you remember, you put like a couple of quarters into a machine and you turn the knob and these super high bouncy balls will come out. Well, they're about to put out a few with Star Wars pictures inside of them, and they're going to sell them in pairs. So you have a large and a small one. While we were there, we talked to Hillary Fine, who was one of the representatives there, who was helping me out and showing me around their booth. The other thing they showed me was something called the Force Glove. And from what I gathered, you put this glove on, and the glove has this section in the middle where if you point it towards a couple of these little figurines that have an internal magnet on them, you can actually simulate pushing something because of the magnetic properties between the glove and the item. So it's kind of like a magnetic experiment device, if you will. They also showed us the Darth Maul room light. Now, they already have a couple of room lights available. I think they have Luke and Vader and some other ones, and you can actually, operate them by remote, and you change the color of the light and that sort of thing. But this year, they're going to introduce a Darth Maul, and that's important because it's a double-sided light, just like the Darth Maul double-sided lightsaber. So you can ignite both sides, and I guess you get twice as much light. Another item they had on display there was the R2-D2 microviewer. From what I understand, it's kind of like a small plastic version of R2-D2, and you can look through it and see some pictures inside of it, through a little viewfinder inside. Again, these are more on the educational side, but if it's Star Wars, I'm always interested in looking at it. Then I also got a quick peek at the Funko line of bobbleheads. Funko makes bobbleheads and some other items, but this time around, they came out with a whole new wave of, it's really a little difficult to describe them. They're Star Wars bobbleheads, but they're kind of weird because the head is much bigger than the body. The eyes are usually big, large black eyes that don't seem to fit the character, but they're very funny looking. And this time around, one of the funniest things I've seen was this Jabba they came out with. And when you see it in the store, it's really cute and funny looking, and it has this Jabba tongue sticking out and almost licking his nose almost, which I guess is supposed to be somewhat, Return of the Jedi-ish, but where it's supposed to be disgusting. Here, it's actually funny looking. It's just a hilarious looking character. They also have a Darth Maul, which, unlike the other characters, this one has like these evil, crazy, swirly yellow eyes that make it look bizarre. They also have a Darth Vader version of these Funko bobbleheads, and as I mentioned before, because the head looks so larger than the body and it's so out of proportion, it looks like Rick Moranis from Spaceballs almost, where the helmet is overwhelmingly larger than the body of the character. And again, these are cute little entries, Star Wars themed. Then I took a quick peek at the CNET booth, where they're exclusively promoting a Star Wars CNET version of the game. Now, CNET's been around for a while now, and they've done other brands, other types of games for CNET. I believe they've done all kinds of versions of the game, from Harry Potter CNET to Twilight. They've done a number of Disney ones. They've done Star Trek. They've done Seinfeld. It's a line that's been around, like I said, for a while. Well, this time around, they're getting around to finally doing a Star Wars version of CNET, which they had a demo there, which looked really cool. The DVD interactive portion of the game is what makes this a great line. And apparently for the first time, this version of CNET will have a streaming component to it where you can actually, I guess, go online and get additional material, additional gameplay through the internet. And it gives you material that's not included on the disc. So that's a cool little extra to have. And like I said, they did have on display a couple of monitors showing you all the different menus and the types of different playable scenes that you would see for the game. And that looked really cool. So that's another one of these really cool games that hopefully will be coming out in this summer. I also stopped at the Jazzwares booth. Jazzwares specializes, as far as the Star Wars line goes, into what would be considered kid spyware. So it's kind of like spy merchandise, but for kids. So you have your night vision goggle, shaped like Commander Cody from the Star Wars prequels. They have an R2-D2 MP4 player where you can actually see in a little display videos. They have USB drives shaped like R2-D2 and Darth Maul. They have something called perimeter droids, which is basically those room warnings. If you cross a certain infrared signal, an alarm goes off for kids to play. They had all kinds of alarm clocks shaped like characters like Darth Vader, Darth Maul. They also have a line of earbuds, also shaped like some of the Star Wars characters. They had some items that were, again, pending license approval, but they displayed a couple where you could see voice changers. So you could change your voice like some of the characters, I guess. This particular line, I guess, would fall somewhere between what you could say an educational toy and as somewhat of a fun toy, too. Mimobot was also there. They also specialize in USB drives shaped like a lot of characters, where you kind of remove the helmet or the head. You could plug in your thumb drive in that manner. They're continuing their thumb drive line. There's also the Tin Box Company, where they do the traditional tin box lunchboxes. Some of the art that they had was the Star Wars art with the traditional open and close, suitcase type of tin box, or the other type with, the more traditional older one where you can actually pop the top of the box, opens up, more of a curved edge to it. Again, with Star Wars art, the original, Revenge of the Jedi type of art, alternate posters, that sort of thing they would use for it. A number of companies offering all kinds of plushy, stuffed animal looking products. Underground Toys was one of them. All kinds of, like I said before, stuffed characters, from Star Wars. Diamond Comics was also there with their line of statues, and they were also displaying the large size X-Wing Luke, that they've made as part of their line of giant vintage size figures. They were there promoting that. Plus, they also had, a number of Stormtroopers and Obi-Wan Kenobis and stuff like that. So, again, this is more slightly a higher upscale stuff. But in the realm of, like I mentioned before, the sideshows and the Gentle Giants, another company that specializes in plushies and also backpacks, plushy backpacks type of deals like the Yodas. They also have an AT-AT backpack now. It's Comic Images. I've seen them, before on some of the other conventions I've been to. But here they had everything on display. And again, you can't buy anything. You just look, but don't touch. Well, join us again next week as we discuss part 2 of our Toy Fair 2012 special, where we go a little deeper into the big companies like Hasbro and Lego, the ones that I am very interested in, and we were able to spend some time with some of them, and we were able to also gather some of their press material so we can really go into their products and see what's coming up later this year, because some of these companies are expanding into other realms that we've been previewing for some of our previous episodes, like Lego, and Hasbro continues with Star Wars and many other product lines. We get to have a quick peek at what they are targeting for this year and possibly the future. So please join me again next week when we continue with Toy Fair 2012. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you here next time on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
Stop.